They promoted the CEO's golden boy instead of me, then made me train him. He mocked my pen test, laughed, ignored protocol. 19 hours later, $31 million was gone, and I didn't lift a finger to stop it. I stayed silent when they insulted me, but the system didn't, and when disaster struck, it recorded everything. Stay until the end, because those who laugh first are the ones caught on camera when they lose it all. My name is Charlotte Greer, and I've spent 15 years building my reputation as the most meticulous security systems tester at Myrick Systems. 38 years old, single by choice, and utterly devoted to protecting the financial data of millions. That devotion meant nothing when they gave my promised promotion to a 25-year-old with a marketing degree and the right last name. The email arrived at 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. I'd already been in the office since 6, reviewing penetration test results from our Frankfurt servers. We're excited to announce Zachary Lang as our new head of security infrastructure. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips. I read it 3 times, certain I'd misunderstood. Zachary Lang, the CEO's son who joined 6 months ago. Fresh from his MBA program, where he'd written a thesis on disrupting traditional security paradigms through social media integration. I'd read it twice. It was 70 pages of buzzwords wrapped around a fundamental misunderstanding of how financial systems actually work. The worst part came an hour later when our CEO, Marcus Lang, stopped by my cubicle. Not my office, because heads of testing don't get offices. Apparently, his cologne announced him before his shadow fell across my monitors. "Charlotte, I know this isn't what you expected," he began, his voice carrying that practiced sympathy executives learn in leadership seminars. "But we need someone with Zach's fresh perspective to modernize our approach. You understand?" I understood perfectly. I understood that my 3 advanced certifications meant less than his son's Instagram follower count. I understood that the 17 critical vulnerabilities I'd identified last quarter were less impressive than Zach's PowerPoint skills. "Of course," I replied, my voice steady as granite. "What would you like me to do?" "Actually, that's why I'm here. Zach specifically requested you as his technical advisor. He wants to learn from the best." Marcus smiled like he was doing me a favor. "You'll report directly to him. Help him get up to speed on our systems. Think of it as mentoring the next generation." Mentoring? I'd been demoted to teaching someone who thought 2-factor authentication was too many steps for users. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of condescending meetings. Zach would summon me to conference rooms, always with an audience of product managers or marketing associates, and ask questions designed to showcase his innovative thinking. "Charlotte, why are we still using these outdated testing protocols?" he'd ask, gesturing at procedures that had prevented 14 major breaches in the last 2 years alone. "Shouldn't we be leveraging AI-driven solutions?" I would explain, patiently, that AI couldn't replace human intuition in identifying zero-day exploits. He would nod, make a note on his tablet, then pivot to his real agenda, impressing whatever audience he'd assembled that day. But the breaking point came when he asked about my latest penetration test report. 3 months of work, hundreds of hours mapping vulnerabilities in our new mobile banking platform. I'd identified a critical flaw in our API authentication that could expose customer data if exploited. "This is quite comprehensive," Zach said during our Friday morning review, holding the printed report I'd bound and submitted. "But isn't it a bit alarmist? Our customers trust us. They don't need to know about every theoretical risk." "It's not theoretical," I said carefully. "I demonstrated the exploit. The proof of concept is in Appendix C." He flipped through the pages with the casual disinterest of someone scrolling through terms and conditions. "Right, but have we actually been breached?" "Not yet. That's the point of penetration testing, to find vulnerabilities before we scare away investors with doom and gloom scenarios." He closed the report with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Charlotte, I appreciate your thoroughness, but we need to balance security with user experience. Our new initiative is about making banking feel effortless, not paranoid." Effortless. I watched him tuck my report under his arm. already forgotten before he'd left the room. In 15 years, I'd never had a security assessment dismissed so casually. That night, I stayed late, staring at my monitors in the empty office. The cursor blinked on my resignation letter draft, but something held me back. Not loyalty to Myrex that had evaporated with my promotion. Something else. A nagging certainty that Zachary Lang was going to destroy everything I'd built. And when he did, someone needed to document exactly how it happened. So I began my own protocol, one he'd never think to look for, because he'd never really understood what I did in the first place. The all-hands meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday, mandatory attendance. Zach had been planning it for weeks, promising a revolutionary vision for Myrex security infrastructure. I arrived 5 minutes early and took a seat in the back corner, my leather portfolio containing a backup copy of my penetration test report resting on my lap. The conference room filled quickly, product managers, engineers, even some C-suite executives. Zach stood at the front, wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Clicking through slides filled with abstract graphics and motivational quotes. "Security doesn't have to be scary," he announced, his voice carrying that confident tone of someone who'd never cleaned up after a data breach. "We've been operating under a paradigm of fear, passwords, protocols, endless testing were suffocating our users with paranoia." I watched my colleagues nod along, some taking notes, a few glanced my way, probably wondering what I thought of my new boss's philosophy. I kept my expression neutral, professional. Inside, my stomach churned. "Which brings me to this," Zach continued, and my heart stopped. He held up my penetration test report, the bound copy I'd given him last week, the one documenting critical vulnerabilities that could cost us millions. "This represents everything wrong with our old approach." He walked to the center of the room, ensuring everyone could see him clearly. 300 pages of what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Charlotte here spent 3 months creating a document designed to terrify us into maintaining the status quo. Every eye in the room turned to me, some sympathetic, most curious, a few almost gleeful. I remained still, my hands folded over my portfolio. "But fear isn't innovation," Zach declared. Then, with a theatrical flourish that would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating, he gripped the report with both hands and tore it down the middle. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. Heep. He continued tearing, methodically reducing months of work to confetti, pages containing exploit codes, vulnerability matrices, detailed remediation plans. All of it fell to the conference room floor like snow. "This is what we do with fear-based thinking at the new Myrex," he announced, dropping the final shreds. "We shed it. We evolve. We trust our systems and our users." Someone started clapping, then another. Soon the room filled with applause while I sat there, watching pieces of my work scatter across the polished floor. One fragment landed near my foot. I could see part of a SQL injection vulnerability I'd discovered, now reduced to meaningless paper scrap. "Charlotte," Zach called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "I know this must be difficult, seeing your work treated this way, but I want you to understand this isn't about disrespecting your effort. It's about changing our mindset. Do you have anything you'd like to add?" Standing up would have shown weakness. Arguing would have painted me as the bitter, passed-over employee. So I did what 15 years in corporate environments had taught me. I smiled. "I appreciate the theatrical demonstration," I said, my voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. "I assume you've retained digital copies of the vulnerability assessments for the implementation team." His smile flickered. "We're moving beyond vulnerability obsession, Charlotte. But don't worry, your knowledge isn't being wasted. You'll be instrumental in helping us build a more user-friendly security experience." User-friendly security, like building a friendlier bank vault by removing the lock. The meeting continued for another hour. Zach outlined his vision: biometric everything. AI-powered threat detection that would somehow magically know the difference between hackers and legitimate users. And my personal favorite: reducing authentication steps to maximize user engagement. I took notes, not because I believed in his vision, but because I wanted a record. Every dismissed protocol, every ignored warning, every moment where marketing speak replaced actual security measures. My pen moved steadily across the page, documenting the systematic dismantling of everything I'd built. After the meeting, I stayed behind, kneeling to collect some of the torn pages. People filed past, some murmuring sympathies, most avoiding eye contact. Zach lingered by the door, watching me with what he probably thought was magnanimity. "You don't need to do that," he said. "Maintenance will handle it." I picked up a piece containing part of my executive summary, the section warning about potential financial exposure. "I know," I replied, standing with a handful of fragments. "I just wanted to remember what fear-based thinking looks like." He laughed, missing the edge in my voice. "That's the spirit, embrace the change. Charlotte, big things are coming." I smiled again, that same professional mask. "I'm counting on it." That night, I worked until 3 a.m. Not on company servers. Zach had already restricted my access levels, citing the need for fresh perspectives on our security architecture. Instead, I worked on my personal system, activating monitoring protocols I'd embedded months ago during routine testing, ghost protocols, invisible to standard security sweeps, designed to track system vulnerabilities in real time. They weren't company-sanctioned. Technically, they violated several policies. But then again, so did tearing up the only document standing between Myrex and catastrophe. I labeled the monitoring dashboard Project Icarus and set it to record everything: access logs, authentication failures, system modifications. Then I wrote one email, saved in drafts. For the record, all critical vulnerabilities identified in the Q3 penetration test remain unaddressed. Physical destruction of documentation does not eliminate digital threats. This serves as formal notice of ongoing security risks. I didn't send it, not yet, but I time-stamped it, backed it up in 3 locations, and added a simple automation rule if certain parameters were met. If the vulnerabilities I'd identified were exploited, the email would send itself to every board member, every regulator, every stakeholder who mattered. Zach thought he'd destroyed my work. In reality, he'd just lit the fuse. The Global Banking Platform 3.0 update was Zach's baby. He'd been hyping it for weeks, promising seamless integration across all international markets, real-time currency conversion, and what he called friction-free transactions. The deployment was scheduled for 2 a.m. Saturday morning, optimal timing to minimize market disruption. On Wednesday afternoon, I found the staffing schedule on my desk with a post-it note in Zach's handwriting. "Please review and optimize." I studied the document, my concern growing with each line. He'd scheduled exactly 3 people for the overnight deployment, 1 engineer in San Francisco, 1 in London, 1 in Singapore. For an update touching $57 billion in daily transactions. I walked to his corner office, the one that should have been mine, and knocked on the glass door. He waved me in without looking up from his 3-monitor setup, probably admiring his latest dashboard design. "The staffing plan for Saturday's deployment," I began, setting the schedule on his desk. 3 people isn't sufficient for—" "It's plenty," he interrupted, finally gracing me with eye contact. "We've automated 90% of the process. The AI validation system will handle most of the heavy lifting." The AI system that's been in production for exactly 6 days. His jaw tightened. The AI system that passed all benchmark tests with flying colors. Unlike your doom and gloom approach, Charlotte, modern infrastructure is self-healing, self-monitoring. We don't need an army of engineers sitting around waiting for problems that won't happen. I pulled out my tablet, opening the risk assessment I'd prepared. The Frankfurt hub processes 30% of our European transactions. If the update corrupts the authentication module, which happened in the sandbox environment twice, we'd need immediate manual intervention. 1 engineer can't handle. The sandbox failures were due to outdated testing protocols, he said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. Your protocols, actually, we've since streamlined the process. You removed the redundancy checks. We removed the unnecessary delays. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, a gift from his father to celebrate his promotion. Charlotte, I understand this is difficult for you, Change always is, but we can't keep operating like it's 2010. Our competitors are leveraging skeleton crews and smart systems. We need to evolve or die. I tried once more, pulling up the incident report from our last major update. 6 months ago, a similar deployment required 14 engineers across 3 continents. We caught 4 critical errors that would have... That was before my optimizations. He stood, signaling the meeting's end. The decision is final. 3 engineers, supported by our AI systems. If you're so concerned, you're welcome to monitor from home. Unofficially, of course. I wouldn't want to burden you with official overtime. The dismissal was clear. I gathered my tablet, my risk assessment unread, my warnings unheeded. At the door, I turned back. I'll need that in writing. The authorization for minimal staffing. His smile was all teeth. Of course, I'll email it to you. Transparency is key to our new culture. The email arrived an hour later, brief, confident, absolving him of nothing while taking credit for everything. I forwarded it to my personal account, then spent the rest of the day documenting every system dependency that would be affected by the update. That night, I created what I called a failure cascade model. Using the vulnerabilities I'd identified in my shredded penetration test, I mapped out exactly how things could go wrong. It started small, a misconfirmed certificate in Frankfurt. Without proper staffing to catch it immediately, the error would propagate through the authentication chain. The AI system, trained on normal operations, wouldn't recognize the unusual pattern as a threat. By my calculations, it would take approximately 19 hours for a localized breach to spread system-wide. I wrote another email, this one more detailed than the last. Official warning: proposed staffing levels for Platform 3.0 deployment create critical vulnerability windows. Minimum safe staffing requires 12 engineers across all time zones, with dedicated monitoring for authentication modules. Proceeding with 3 engineers eliminates our ability to respond to cascade failures. Specific risk factors include... I listed them all, every vulnerability, every dependency, every point where Zach's optimized plan could shatter like spun glass. Then I added his email as an attachment, proof that he'd been warned, and sent it to him, the board's risk committee, and the head of internal audit. His response came at 11:47 p.m. Your concerns have been noted and evaluated. The deployment will proceed as scheduled. Your continued resistance to modernization has been documented in your performance file. I sat in my home office, staring at that response. He'd just created a paper trail of willful negligence, whether he realized it or not. Zachary Lang had signed his name to whatever came next. I opened Project Icarus on my personal system and set up a new monitoring protocol. Every transaction, every authentication request, every system hiccup during Saturday's deployment would be captured, time-stamped, and stored. The official systems might fail. The skeleton crew might miss the signs. The AI might optimize us into oblivion, but my shadow network would see everything. Then I did something I'd never done in 15 years of weekend deployments. I set my alarm for 8 a.m. Saturday and went to bed. Let them handle their friction-free future. I'd be watching the friction burn it all down. I woke at 3:08 a.m. Saturday, not from my alarm, but from the subtle ping of Project Icarus, detecting its first anomaly. I padded to my home office in pajamas and coffee-stained MIT sweatshirt, expecting a minor glitch. What I found made me sink slowly into my desk chair. The Frankfurt authentication server was cycling through certificate validations at impossible speeds, thousands per second. Each failure generated a new request. Each request spawned 3 more. Exponential growth, the kind that turns molehills into mountains in minutes. I pulled up the official Myrex monitoring dashboard on my second screen. It showed all green lights. The AI system Zach trusted so completely was interpreting the massive spike in authentication requests as increased user engagement during off-peak hours. It was optimizing the system to handle what it thought was legitimate traffic. $4.2 million. That's how much had already moved through compromised accounts in the 17 minutes since the cascade began. Small transactions, designed to fly under traditional radar. But Project Icarus wasn't traditional, it was paranoid, meticulous, and mine. I could have called, should have called. The Singapore engineer would be at his desk, probably playing mobile games while the AI handled everything. One phone call could have initiated emergency protocols, frozen the affected accounts, stopped the hemorrhage before it became an arterial spray. Instead, I made coffee. Dark roast, 2 sugars, a splash of cream that had almost turned. I sat back down and watched the numbers climb. 5 million. 7. The Frankfurt error had spread to London, where the lone engineer was probably asleep at his desk. The AI helpfully rerouted traffic to maintain optimal performance. My phone buzzed. A text from the automated system. Unusual activity detected on Platform 3.0. Please acknowledge. I acknowledged. Then I archived the alert and continued watching. By 5 a.m., the breach had reached Tokyo. The pattern was elegant in its simplicity. Whoever designed this had studied our systems, understood our vulnerabilities. They weren't smashing windows. They were picking locks with keys we'd left under the doormat. Keys I'd warned about. Keys Zach had laughed off as theoretical risks. 12 million, 15, 20. The genius was in the timing. Saturday morning in the U.S. meant skeleton crews everywhere. The December holiday season meant half our senior staff were on vacation, and Zach's beautiful AI system, trained to optimize and accommodate, was helping the thieves carry our money out the door. I opened my draft folder and reviewed the email I'd prepared weeks ago. All it needed was updated numbers and a timestamp. My finger hovered over the send button as Project Icarus tracked another 3 million disappearing into the digital ether. Not yet. At 6:15 a.m., something changed. The attackers got greedy. Instead of maintaining their steady drain, they triggered a massive transfer request, 50 million from our institutional holdings. Finally, blessedly, stupidly. They'd crossed a threshold even Zach's lobotomized system couldn't ignore. Alarms started screaming across the official dashboards. The London engineer jolted awake. Singapore initiated lockdown protocols. San Francisco, where it was still Friday night, got the emergency calls that would ruin everyone's weekend. But it was too late for clean fixes. The authentication system was so compromised that legitimate users couldn't access their accounts. The AI, trying to optimize its way out of the crisis, made 17 decisions in 30 seconds that turned a breach into a catastrophe. It locked out valid transactions while leaving compromised channels open. It rerouted secure traffic through infected nodes. It optimized us into chaos. I pulled up my personal log and began documenting everything. Screenshots of Project Icarus catching what our official systems missed. Timestamps showing the 19-hour cascade I'd predicted playing out in real time. The steady climb from thousands to millions, while our skeleton crew slept and our AI helped the thieves. 28 million, 30, 31. By 7 a.m., Zach was calling my personal phone. I let it ring, counting the musical notes of my ringtone while watching another million slip away. He called 6 times before trying my landline, then my work phone, then back to my cell. Desperate, panicked. The golden boy finally understanding that confidence couldn't code and charisma couldn't patch security holes. I finished my coffee, now cold and bitter. The sun was rising over Boston, painting my office walls gold. Somewhere across the city, executives were being pulled from their beds, lawyers were being summoned, and Zachary Lang was learning what fear-based thinking actually prevented. Project Icarus showed the final tally, 31,400,000, and change, a rounding error for some companies, a career-ending catastrophe for the man who'd shredded my warnings and called them paranoia. I finally answered my phone on the 15th call. Charlotte. Zach's voice was raw, desperate. Thank God. We need you. The system there's been, we can't. I'm aware, I said calmly, watching the last authenticated transaction fail on my screen. I've been monitoring the situation. You have how your access was. He stopped, probably realizing questions could wait. Can you help, please? I know things have been difficult between us, but I submitted a comprehensive vulnerability assessment 3 weeks ago. I interrupted. You tore it up. I warned about the staffing levels for this deployment. You called my concerns fear-based thinking. I identified these exact attack vectors. You chose to ignore them. Silence on his end, broken only by muffled shouting in the background. I'll forward you my documentation, I continued. Everything I've tracked since 3:08 this morning, every transaction, every failure, every moment where proper staffing could have prevented this, I'm sure the board will find it educational. Charlotte, please. I hung up and opened my email. Time to send the message I'd been composing for weeks. Not to Zach, he was finished. To the people who'd be cleaning up his mess, investigating his failures, deciding who to blame and who to believe. $31 million gone, a reputation destroyed, a golden boy's wings melted by the sun he'd flown too close to. And I hadn't lifted a finger to stop it. The email that changed everything took me 43 minutes to write. Not because I struggled with words I'd been composing it in my head for weeks, but because precision mattered. Every timestamp, every warning, every ignored protocol needed to be perfect, legally airtight, professionally devastating. To Board Risk Committee, Internal Audit, SEC Compliance Division, CC Executive Leadership Team, RE. Formal withdrawal from security oversight. Documentation attached. Members of the board. Effective immediately, I am withdrawing from all security coordination responsibilities at Myrex Systems. After 15 years of service, I find myself unable to continue enabling the systematic dismantling of protocols that protect our stakeholders' assets. For the record, I am attaching my complete Q3 penetration test digital copy, which identified the vulnerabilities exploited in today's breach. Email correspondence warning of insufficient deployment staffing. Dated 11/15. Risk assessment models predicting cascade failure scenarios. Documentation of all warnings issued and subsequently ignored. Please direct all questions regarding the Platform 3.0 security architecture to Zachary Lang. I understand he has strong opinions about my fear-based thinking. Perhaps the board would benefit from reviewing his innovative approach, particularly his decision to physically destroy security documentation during an all-hands meeting. I have maintained personal monitoring of our systems since 3:08 a.m. this morning. Detailed logs of the 19-hour breach are available upon request. These were captured through testing protocols I established, the same protocols Mr. Lang deemed unnecessary delays. Respectfully, Charlotte Greer, former head of security testing. My finger hovered over the send button for exactly 3 seconds. Then I clicked, and the die was cast. Within minutes, my inbox exploded. Board members who hadn't known my name yesterday suddenly needed immediate calls. The head of audit wanted my logs within the hour. The SEC compliance team sent automated acknowledgments that would spawn investigations lasting months. But the most interesting reaction came from an unexpected source. At 9:27 a.m., Project Icarus flagged unusual activity in the system logs. Someone was trying to delete records specifically, the authentication logs from Frankfurt where the breach began. The attempts were clumsy, desperate, leaving digital fingerprints everywhere. I watched in real time as someone with Zach's credentials tried to rewrite history. I activated my automated defense protocols. Every deletion attempt was logged, backed up, and forwarded to a secure server. Screenshots captured each command, each timestamp, each panicked attempt to hide evidence. He was digging his grave deeper with every keystroke. My phone rang, Marcus Lang's personal number. Ms. Greer, the CEO's voice was ice and silk. I understand you've been monitoring our situation independently. I've been protecting shareholder interests, Mr. Lang, something I thought was still part of my job description. Your job description includes following chain of command, working within established channels. I laughed, surprising us both. Like the established channel where your son shredded my security assessment, or the channel where he ignored every warning about this deployment. Charlotte. He tried for paternal warmth, but stress fractured his composure. We're all on the same team here. This crisis requires unity, not finger-pointing. I agree completely. which is why I've provided full documentation to everyone who needs it. Unity through transparency. You've potentially exposed us to regulatory action with your premature communication. No, sir. Your son exposed us to regulatory action by dismantling our security infrastructure. I've simply ensured there's an accurate record of how $31 million vanished while our AI optimized the theft. Silence stretched between us. In the background, I could hear frantic voices, ringing phones, the soundtrack of a corporation in crisis. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Nothing. I've already submitted my documentation. The board has my monitoring logs. The SEC has my warnings. There's nothing left for me to want." "Everyone wants something, Charlotte." I considered the question while watching Zach's continued attempts to alter logs. His desperation was almost pitiful, like watching someone try to unbake a cake. "I wanted to protect this company," I said finally. "I wanted my expertise valued. I wanted my warnings heeded. But that ship sailed when you promoted your son over me. Now I just want the truth preserved." "The truth can be flexible in situations like these." "Not my truth. I have timestamps, authentication records, a complete trail from the first warning to the last stolen dollar. Your son is currently trying to delete that trail. By the way, you might want to tell him he's making things worse." Marcus Lang's breathing was audible over the phone. The man who'd built an empire on calculated risks, finally understanding the cost of nepotism. "If you testify—" "When I testify," I corrected. "When, not if. The only question is whether I'm testifying as a witness or a whistleblower. That depends entirely on how the next few hours unfold." I hung up before he could respond. Then I initiated one final protocol, a dead man's switch I'd built into Project Icarus. If anyone tried to terminate my access, lock me out, or delete my records, everything would automatically upload to WikiLeaks, the Financial Times, and 17 regulatory bodies across 3 continents. My phone immediately lit up with calls, board members, lawyers, reporters who'd somehow already caught wind of the story. I ignored them all, instead pulling up my monitoring dashboard one last time. The breach had stopped at $30,427,816. The exact figure would appear in headlines tomorrow, in indictments next month, in business school case studies for years to come. But right now, it was just a number on my screen. Proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't action, it's inaction. It's knowing when to step back and let someone else's arrogance become their avalanche. I closed Project Icarus and started packing my office. Not because I'd been fired, that would come later, wrapped in lawyers and NDAs. I packed because my work here was finished. 15 years of building walls, and it took Zachary Lang less than 15 weeks to tear them down. The only question now was who'd be buried in the rubble. By noon Saturday, the story had leaked. Not from me, I'd been meticulously silent beyond my official communications. But $31 million doesn't vanish quietly, and Myrex had too many employees with friends at TechCrunch, Reuters, and the Wall Street Journal. Breaking major security breach at Myrex Systems. 31 members confirmed missing. I watched the headlines multiply from my couch, still in my MIT sweatshirt, eating leftover Thai food. My phone had logged 217 missed calls. Journalists wanted statements. Employees wanted answers. Lawyers wanted meetings. The first blog post appeared at 12:43 p.m. on Security Now, written by someone who clearly had inside information. They'd mapped the breach pattern, identified the Frankfurt origin point, even speculated about the skeleton crew staffing. But the damning detail came in paragraph 6. Sources indicate senior security staff warned extensively about vulnerabilities in the Platform 3.0 architecture, concerns that were allegedly dismissed by recently appointed head of security infrastructure, Zachary Lang, son of CEO Marcus Lang. The comments section exploded. Former employees shared their own stories of ignored warnings. Current employees, hiding behind throwaway accounts, confirmed the toxic culture of style over substance. Someone posted a photo from the all-hands meeting, blurry but unmistakable, of Zach tearing papers while smiling. By 2 p.m., Redmark Bank made their move. As our largest institutional client, they had the most to lose and the least patience for excuses. Their statement was surgical in its precision. Effective immediately, Redmark is suspending all transactions through Mirex systems pending a comprehensive security audit by independent assessors. The trust of our depositors is paramount, and recent events suggest systemic failures in Mirex's security infrastructure that cannot be ignored. FairHealth followed within an hour, their withdrawal packaged in softer language but equally devastating intent. Then CitiFund, then Prospera Insurance. Each departure triggered automatic alerts in my monitoring system, not Project Icarus, which I'd shuttered, but the standard dashboards every employee could access. I imagined Zach watching the same screens, seeing his beautiful frictionless future hemorrhaging clients faster than it had leaked money. At 3:37 p.m., someone at Mirex tried damage control. A press release appeared on the company website, unsigned, but written in the breathless style of our marketing department. Mirex Systems experienced a targeted cyber attack during routine system maintenance. Our innovative AI-driven security systems successfully prevented further unauthorized access, and we are working with law enforcement to pursue the perpetrators. No client data was compromised, and all funds are insured through our comprehensive protection policies. The lie about client data lasted exactly 40 minutes. A security researcher in Berlin posted proof that personal information from 17,000 accounts was already for sale on dark web forums, email addresses, phone numbers, transaction histories, everything needed for a lifetime of identity theft. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You did this. You could have stopped it. Z." I screenshotted the message and added it to my documentation folder. Zachary Lang, in his infinite wisdom, had just admitted in writing that I could have prevented the breach, that I'd chosen not to. That would play beautifully in court. The boardroom must have been in full panic mode, because at 4:15 p.m., something unprecedented happened. Marcus Lang was removed as CEO. The board's statement was clinical, citing need for new leadership during this transitional period, but everyone could read between the lines. The king had fallen protecting his prince. Stock price reflected the carnage. Mirex opened Monday's pre-market trading down 47%. Billions in market cap evaporated, taking retirement funds and investor confidence with it. The SEC announced a formal investigation. The FBI opened a criminal case. 3 class action lawsuits were filed before markets officially opened. But the moment that truly marked the end came in a small paragraph buried in the Financial Times coverage. Internal documents obtained by the FT reveal that Charlotte Greer, a 15-year veteran of Mirex's security team, submitted detailed warnings about the exploited vulnerabilities weeks before the breach. These warnings were allegedly dismissed and, in one instance, physically destroyed during a company meeting. Ms. Greer could not be reached for comment. I couldn't be reached because I'd turned off my phone, deleted my social media, and ignored the reporters camped outside my building. My silence spoke louder than any statement could. By evening, Mirex meltdown was trending globally. Someone had created a mock-up of Zach tearing a document with dollar bills floating away. It became a meme within hours. Security professionals shared their own horror stories of ignored warnings. Business schools started adding the case to their ethics curricula in real time. Through it all, I sat in my quiet apartment, eating ice cream straight from the container, watching an empire burn on my laptop screen. No champagne toasts, no victory dances, just the hollow satisfaction of being catastrophically right. At 9:21 p.m., Marcus Lang released a personal statement. "I take full responsibility for the security failures at Mirex Systems. In promoting my son to a position beyond his capabilities, I violated the trust of our stakeholders and employees. Effective immediately, both Zachary and I are resigning from all positions at Mirex. We will cooperate fully with all investigations." The comments underneath were brutal. Someone had found Zach's thesis on disrupting traditional security paradigms and posted excerpts beside screenshots of the breach. The contrast between his academic confidence and practical incompetence was devastating. I closed my laptop and sat in the dark. Somewhere across Boston, two men were watching their careers end in real time. $31 million had bought the truth a spotlight too bright to escape. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and depositions and job offers from companies that suddenly valued paranoid security testing. Tonight, though, I simply sat with the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge isn't what you do. It's what you don't do when you hold all the cards and someone else has already gone all in with a losing hand. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Monday in the 42nd floor conference room, the one with bulletproof glass and panoramic views of Boston Harbor. I arrived at 9:55, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather portfolio containing printed copies of every warning, every email, every timestamp from the breach. The room was already full. Board members who typically phoned in from vacation homes had flown in overnight. The interim CEO, Patricia Hawkins, sat at the head of the table looking like she'd aged 5 years in 48 hours. The head of risk management avoided eye contact. Legal counsel whispered frantically in the corner. And there, at the far end of the table, sat Marcus and Zachary Lang. Marcus looked hollow, his usual commanding presence reduced to expensive fabric draped over defeat. But Zach still had that spark of defiance, that golden boy conviction that charm could fix anything. He was about to learn otherwise. "Ms. Greer," Patricia Hawkins began, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Thank you for joining us. We've reviewed your documentation extensively. Before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to add?" I stood, placed my portfolio on the table, and met every eye in the room. 3 months ago, I identified 17 critical vulnerabilities in our Platform 3.0 architecture. These weren't theoretical risks or abstract possibilities. They were specific, exploitable weaknesses that I demonstrated in controlled testing. The proof of concept code was in Appendix C of my report. I paused, letting that sink in. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. 6 weeks ago, Mr. Zachary Lang destroyed that report in front of 43 witnesses. He called it fear-based thinking and told the room that paranoia was killing innovation. I have signed statements from 7 attendees confirming this event. Zach started to speak, but his father's hand on his arm stopped him. 11 days ago, I continued, I warned in writing about insufficient staffing for the Platform 3.0 deployment. I specified that 3 engineers could not handle cascade failures across our global infrastructure. Mr. Lang responded that AI systems would handle any issues, and that my concerns had been noted and evaluated. I opened my portfolio and distributed copies of the email chain. Board members read with increasing alarm. At 3:08 Saturday morning, the predicted cascade failure began in Frankfurt. By 3:25, over $4 million had been transferred through compromised accounts. I monitored this in real time through security protocols I'd embedded during standard testing. I did not alert anyone. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Legal counsel practically levitated from their chair. Patricia Hawkins had to call for order twice before the noise subsided. "You watched the breach happen," one board member demanded, "and did nothing." "I did exactly what I'd been instructed to do," I replied calmly. Mr. Lang made it clear that my approach to security was outdated, that my warnings were paranoia, that I should embrace his vision of frictionless, AI-managed systems, so I stepped back and let his vision play out. That's sabotage." Zach finally found his voice, jumping to his feet. "You had a duty to protect company assets." I turned to face him directly. "I had a duty to follow the chain of command. You were head of security infrastructure. You dismissed my warnings, destroyed my documentation, and threatened my performance reviews when I persisted. Tell me, Mr. Lang, what exactly should I have done? Violated your direct orders, gone over your head to the board, you assured me supported your vision. You could have called one phone call. To whom? I pulled out my phone, showing my contact list. To you, who'd restricted my access privileges, to the 3 engineers you insisted were sufficient, to the AI system you trusted more than 15 years of human expertise. Marcus Lang spoke for the first time, his voice barely above a whisper. You let us burn to prove a point. No, I corrected. You lit the match when you promoted unqualified leadership. You poured the gasoline when you ignored expertise in favor of nepotism. I simply declined to be your fire extinguisher after you'd spent months telling everyone that fire was just fear-based thinking. Patricia Hawkins raised a hand for silence. The forensics team has confirmed Ms. Greer's timeline. Every warning she issued was accurate. Every vulnerability she identified was exploited. The question now is liability. The head of risk management finally spoke. Charlotte's monitoring system, Project Icarus, captured data our official systems missed. Without her logs, we wouldn't even know how the breach propagated. Ironically, her inaction provided the only accurate record of what happened. She admitted she could have stopped it. Zach's desperation pitched his voice higher. In her text. What text? Patricia asked. I smiled and produced the screenshot. Mr. Lang sent me a message Saturday afternoon stating, quote, You did this? You could have stopped it. I interpreted this as an admission that my warnings were accurate and my expertise could have prevented the breach expertise he'd systematically dismissed. The legal counsel went pale. He contacted you directly about the breach outside official channels. After trying to delete authentication logs using his administrative credentials, yes, I have timestamps and screenshots of those attempts as well. The room fell silent. Even Zach seemed to finally understand the depth of his exposure. Every desperate move he'd made in those panicked hours had tightened the noose. Patricia Hawkins stood. Mr. Lang Jr., please wait outside while the board deliberates. They left Marcus with dignity intact, Zach stumbling like he'd been punched. As the door closed, I heard him asking his father about criminal liability, about prison, about how everything had gone so wrong. Ms. Greer, Patricia turned to me. The board needs to know, are you willing to testify to everything you've presented today? I've already provided all documentation to the SEC and FBI. My testimony is a formality at this point. She nodded slowly. And your future with Myrex? I closed my portfolio and stood. I submitted my resignation Saturday morning, effective immediately. But I've had several interesting conversations with your competitors about the value of paranoid security testing. As I reached the door, Patricia called out one last time. Charlotte, for what it's worth, the board should have promoted you. Yes, I agreed, not turning around. You should have. I left them to their deliberations, their damage control, their desperate attempts to salvage a company worth of trust destroyed in 19 hours, in the hallway. Zach sat slumped on a bench, his golden boy facade finally, completely shattered. He looked up as I passed, searching for words that wouldn't come. I could have offered comfort, could have softened the blow with platitudes about learning experiences and second chances. Instead, I kept walking. Sometimes the most devastating response to someone who destroyed your work, mocked your expertise, and blamed you for their failures isn't revenge. It's indifference. 6 months later, I sat in a corner office overlooking San Francisco Bay, watching fog roll across the Golden Gate Bridge. My new title, Global Head of Security Architecture at Sentinel Systems, came with a view that made Myrex's Boston Harbor look quaint. More importantly, it came with a board that understood the value of paranoia. The Myrex breach had become required reading in every cybersecurity program in the country. They called it the Icarus Incident, a perfect storm of hubris, nepotism, and willful ignorance that cost $31 million and destroyed a company's reputation overnight. Business schools taught it as a cautionary tale. Security conferences dissected it frame by frame. Marcus Lang was facing federal charges for attempted evidence tampering. Zachary Lang had become a living meme, his photo next to the definition of failing upward in online dictionaries. Last I heard, he was working at his uncle's car dealership in New Hampshire, far from any computers that mattered. Myrex itself limped along under new management, its stock price still 40% below pre-breach levels. They'd implemented every recommendation from my original penetration test 3 months and $31 million too late. But the real poetry of the situation came in the form of a LinkedIn notification that morning. 15 different Myrex employees had viewed my profile in the past week. Former colleagues who'd applauded when Zach tore up my report, who'd embraced his vision of frictionless security, who'd stayed silent when I was sidelined. Now they were looking for lifeboats on a sinking ship, looking to the woman they'd watched get demoted, dismissed, and disrespected, looking for the paranoid thinker who'd been right all along. I archived each view without responding. Indifference, I'd learned, was the most elegant revenge. My assistant knocked and entered yes. I had an assistant now carrying a stack of resumes. The 2:30 interview is here. Also, Patricia Hawkins called again. She says the Sentinel board position is still open if you're interested. Patricia had landed well after Myrex, taking over a struggling fintech startup. She'd called monthly for the past half year, each offer more generous than the last. Maybe someday I'd return her calls. Maybe not. Send the candidate in, I said, turning from the window. And block the next hour. I want to review the penetration test results from Singapore. As my assistant left, I opened the test results and smiled. 17 vulnerabilities identified, 3 critical, all documented, verified, and ready for remediation. No AI promises, no frictionless fantasies, just meticulous, paranoid, fear-based thinking that kept $20 billion safe. My phone buzzed with a news alert. SEC finds Myrex Systems record, $50 million for security negligence. Below that, a smaller headline. Zachary Lang agrees to lifetime ban from financial services industry. I deleted the alert and focused on the work that mattered. Somewhere in this code was a weakness waiting to be exploited. A door left unlocked. A password written on a digital sticky note. My job was to find it before someone with worse intentions did. The candidate arrived young, eager, clutching a portfolio that probably contained their life's work. I recognized the hunger in their eyes, the need to prove themselves, to be valued for their expertise. Tell me, I began, settling back in my chair, what's your approach to executive pushback when you identify critical vulnerabilities? They launched into their answer something about diplomacy and finding common ground. All wrong, but teachable. I took notes, remembering another eager professional who'd once believed competence spoke louder than connections. That woman had been right about the vulnerabilities, right about the risks, right about everything except one crucial detail. Sometimes the best way to prove your point isn't to prevent disaster. Sometimes you just need to step back and let the system work exactly as designed. Let the architects of catastrophe sign their names to their creation. Let the evidence accumulate in time-stamped, courtroom-ready clarity. Let $31 million demonstrate what fear-based thinking actually prevents. The interview continued, but my mind wandered to that Saturday morning 6 months ago. 3:08 a.m., coffee growing cold, numbers climbing on my screen. The moment I could have been a hero and chose instead to be a witness. Some would call it vindictive. Others might say unethical. But I slept soundly every night knowing one simple truth: I'd tried to protect them, warned them, begged them to listen. They chose to trust a golden boy's smile over 15 years of expertise. I gave them exactly what they asked for: a world without my paranoid interference. The fact that World cost $31 million and 2 careers, that was just the market pricing ignorance at its true value. My new penetration test blinked on the screen, waiting for my analysis. 17 vulnerabilities in Singapore, each one a potential Myrex moment. But here, in this office, with this board, my warnings would be heard, my expertise valued, my paranoia embraced as the asset it had always been. I smiled and got to work. After all, someone had to stand between the hackers and the billions. Someone who understood that in cybersecurity, fear wasn't the enemy. Complacency was. Thank you so much for listening to Charlotte's story of calculated silence and automated revenge. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to connect and hear your thoughts on Charlotte's decision to let the system collapse. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button if this story resonated with you. And if you really want to help more people discover tales of brilliant revenge like this one, please hit the hype button. It makes a huge difference in getting these stories heard. Until next time, remember sometimes the most powerful action is knowing when not to act.